Brexit Day finally arrived in January after years of parliamentary impasse and delay, and according to an archived interview with former Brexit Secretary David Davis, the pivotal Chequers meeting, where Theresa May presented her Brexit deal, was actually rigged. Brexiteers are looking forward to a new deal being struck with the EU by the end of this year, after Boris Johnson finally managed to pull the UK out of the bloc back in January. Lifelong Eurosceptic Mr Davis has urged the UK this week to strike a deal with the EU while it is still grappling with coronavirus. He explained to LBC that the bloc would agree to a new deal if it had any sense at all, while some figures such as the EU's chief negotiator Michel Barnier have called for an extension to the transition period. This is not the first time Mr Davis has stood up for his Eurosceptic beliefs. Back in 2018, he was the first cabinet minister to resign in opposition to Mrs May's Chequers deal, which he argued offered a soft Brexit. Speaking to BBC journalist Mark Mardell for BBC Radio 4's Brexit, A Love Story, the former cabinet minister explained why he quit his job after the key meeting. Mr. Mardell asked, "What mood were you in when you went into the meeting? Did you feel it was going to end up as it did?" He said, "Well, I thought the odds were against me. Normally with things like this, it is at least to some extent, rigged. This is a 75 to 80% Remainer camp, so I didn't expect to win, but I was damned if I was going to give up without a fight." Mr. Mardell asked, "Did you directly confront the Prime Minister?" He replied, "Well, I said to her in terms, here are 4 or 5 things that are fatal to this. And I didn't mince words about that." He added while Mrs May did not argue back due to the format of the debate, which goes in sequence before the Prime Minister summarizes all the arguments. The former Brexit secretary said, her summing up was very clear, it was in favour of her case, full stop. As Mr Mardell pointed out, the potential rebels-in-chief apparently had no chance to consult with each other during the weekend at Chequers. As he told the BBC back in 2018, he did not believe in the Chequers deal. Mr Davis said it was not tenable for him to stay in the position and persuade Conservative MPs to back the policy when he himself thought it to be unworkable. He then acknowledged it was a career-ending decision, but it was personal for him as a keen Brexiter, and he felt the UK was giving away too much and too easily to the bloc in the negotiations. He also admitted to Mr Mardell it was the Chequers meeting that prompted his resignation. The BBC reported at the time, the resignation is a blow to Mrs May as she seeks to win over Eurosceptic MPs to her proposed Brexit vision, which would form the basis of the UK's position in ongoing talks with the EU. In his resignation letter, Mr Davis told the then Prime Minister, "The general direction of policy will leave us in at best a weak negotiating position, and possibly an inescapable one." However, Mrs May replied, "I do not agree with your characterization of the policy we agreed at Cabinet on Friday." Following his decision to resign, both Boris Johnson, then Foreign Secretary, and Steve Baker, Brexit Undersecretary, decided to step down too, in opposition to the deal and Mrs May's attempt to sweep it through the Cabinet. Mr Johnson then famously said that the government had allowed a fog of self-doubt to cloud negotiations.